Good afternoon and welcome to the latest Family Business webinar from Family Business United. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Paul Andrews and I founded Family Business United 10 years ago this month. I'm delighted today that the session we're going to be talking about is all around succession, long-term sustainability of family firms and what helps family businesses stand the test of time. We've got a fantastic audience joining us today, but we've also got a fantastic panel from around the world. So I'll let them introduce themselves very shortly. I'm often asked what are the key factors in terms of family businesses that have managed to pass from generation to generation and gone on for longevity. And it seemed like a really sensible time, given the past year and lots of the strategic conversations that family business has been having, to really start the Global Summit this year with a session around long-standing family businesses and what they can do to survive those periods. But before we get into the detail of the session, let me ask the panel briefly to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about where they're from, what they do, and their impact on the family business sector. So, Rob, if I can ask you to introduce yourself first, and we'll just go around the screen.
Hi, Paul. And first, thanks for hosting. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So my name is Rob Lachenauer. I'm managing partner of Banyan Global. We're an advisory firm. Our clients are owners of typically large family businesses, and we help a lot with generational transition. And I'm also the co-author of the Harvard Business Review Family Business Handbook that just came out this year. And I live in Boston, but I'm in the US Virgin Islands today.
Thanks, Rob. I've had enough about the Virgin Islands today. The sun looks beautiful and the sea looks great too. Sian, can I come to you, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Sian Steele. I'm a family business advisor and a board member of a number of family businesses. I've spent much of my career working for PwC and advising companies of all shapes and sizes in the UK and overseas, particularly Asia. I was a member of the advisory board in Asia for several years, and just passionate about family businesses, periods of change. I think I'm probably just a bit nosy, actually. I like getting to know what's really going on. So that's me.
Yeah, thanks, Sian. And Willem?
Right. Well, my name is Willem van Eeghen. I have retired, meanwhile, passed on my job as CEO to my nephew. He's a 15th generation in the company. And I'm still present. I was president of the Enochians, an association of family companies which are 200 years or older and still run by the same families as the founder. So that is in brief what I'm doing, and I'm on some other boards as well.
So we're looking forward to the input from you, Willem, in terms of not only your own 14th generation role, but the 15th generation transition, and then also the Les Enochians is a fantastic organisation too. So I'm looking forward to some input there. Christian, can I come to you in Hong Kong, please?
So thank you again, Paul, for having me tonight, and it's a pleasure to be here with the other panelists and with the audience. Sorry, I'm a little bit sitting a little bit in the dark. I'm an Australian. I was originally sort of a tax and trust lawyer, but I moved to Hong Kong about 25 years ago. I also joined, when I got to Hong Kong, I joined PwC, became a partner there, responsible for their estate duty planning practice because I was a trust lawyer by background. Eventually I moved to join a private bank as head of wealth advisory for Asia for JP Morgan Private Bank. And there at JP Morgan, I got introduced to the world of sort of family business, family office, family governance. And I thought, this is a really important space. But back at that time, I didn't see a lot of people doing it in Asia independently. And I just thought that, within my bank role, I was talking to a lot of their clients and you could sense a lot of interest, but it just didn't seem to get traction. And so I sort of made the bet that I needed to be independent to be in this space. So I've been independent as a sort of independent family advisor for the last 13 years. Where I am today is that I work for about 6 clients on a sort of very ongoing basis. I've been working for the 6 of them for a minimum of 5 years, some of them for much longer. And so for some of them, I'm sort of combining that sort of trust knowledge with the family business succession. For others, I'm doing things around sort of coaching and mentoring and human capital development in the family. So I'm a jack of all trades, but for a small number of families. Yeah.
So thank you, Christian. And Sonu, last but not least.
Thanks, Paul. I'm looking forward to the discussion today. So my name is Sonu Bhasin. Normally I live in India, New Delhi, but I am in Miami. We're visiting our son. I am a professional turned entrepreneur. So I spent 30 years in the corporate world in various leadership roles. And now I work in the area of family businesses. My corporate connect continues because I'm an independent director on boards of a few companies, both domestic Indian as well as multinational. And my work in family businesses is largely around advising clients, patriarchs, normally, selectively. But a lot of what I want to propagate or make people aware about family businesses and the issues is through my writings. So I have 2 books published. I have more coming up. I bring out a magazine which is called Families in Business, and to my mind this is India's only standalone magazine that addresses the concerns of family business owners and their work. That's what I do.
So as you can see, we've brought together a panel who various skills and various skill sets, but really between them all experience of advising, consulting, but also actually being in family businesses. So hopefully we've got a good balance this afternoon and a good geographical spread too. Rob, I want to come to you first. And actually, when we talk about long-standing family firms, there's a lot of copy written around rags to riches and rags in 3 generations, and that's been sort of perpetuated, I guess, over the last 20, 30 years. What's your view on that? Because we're talking about long-standing family firms today, and that kind of contradicts exactly what we're talking about. But actually, where do you sit on this rags to riches theory?
Paul, we think that this rags to riches to rags in 3 generations is in fact a harmful myth. The truth is that family businesses are the longest lasting companies. Willem can attest to that. And they're the predominant form of ownership worldwide. It hurts us when some service providers use the 3-generation rule to scare clients, saying you got to do something because that 3rd generation of cousins will lose the business. You read a ton about it in the press. Most articles in the press will cite the 3-generation rule. And worst of all, we think when family business owners themselves start thinking of it as self-fulfilling prophecy and try to exit their business or do something that's really not warranted. So it's really important, I think people on this phone call probably know that family businesses matter greatly. Some of the statistics say that they're like more than 80% of all ownership, all forms of ownership are family businesses. I know in the States, there are like 5.5 million family businesses out there, and they're not just small ones. They're also, Cargill, Walmart, Ford, Tata, over $100 billion in revenue. So not only are they predominant, they also can be very, very large and last a whole, generation after generation. This original 3-generation rule came from the study of industrial firms in Illinois back in the 1970s. And I would urge you, if you want to really know it, read the study and you'll see there are many faults in it. The takeaway, though, that family businesses are doomed when we know that they're not, that they can be really outlast other forms of capitalism, is something I think we should cut off at the nub.
Yeah, Sian, I can see you nodding there. I'm assuming that's a nod of agreement.
Yeah, totally. I think if you look at something like the stock exchange and look at the number of companies that were there 100 years ago, you won't find very many names. Whereas, as you absolutely rightly say, there are lots and lots of family businesses that survive. And also, those that don't continue in family ownership doesn't mean it's not successful. So I'm not sure what the measures of success are that people are applying, but it's certainly not my experience that it's rags to riches in 3 generations. I completely concur.
Fantastic. And what do you think makes family firms survive for generations, Sian? What do you think are some of the factors that make them successful?
I think it's really interesting. I think that there clearly has to be great communication, but I think crucially there has to be a systematic approach to considering why you remain in business together. So if you're not sure why you are doing business together, then I struggle with families who lose their sense of purpose. So crucial to know why you're doing it together, to have an environment where you can say, actually, I'm not enjoying this, I don't feel that this fulfills my purposes, and I can step away. But there has to be that good communication about why are we doing it. And I think that in those conversations, it's really important to recognise that quite often the first generation will have set up a business in a very entrepreneurial way in order to meet a need. It may be the need to provide for your family, it may be the need to problem solve or show that your idea worked, but it's quite likely that the purpose for future generations will change. And so if you don't have a forum in which you can go back and reflect on whether that purpose is still good and restate it and re-engage with it, then actually what you risk is having a business that's stagnating and increasingly detached from its board, and that actually you just keep doing what you were doing because it works, and that's really not a very healthy place to be. So I think constant reflection on why are we doing this, what's the purpose, is that still relevant, and does that guide our board in being able to deliver really good business results for us.
Okay. I mean, it sounded right straight off the bat there, to be fair. And so, one of the questions we had for you was, how important is purpose in terms of family firms to be successful? So how does purpose fit into your kind of factors that you think make for long-standing family businesses and for them to be successful? How important is purpose?
Yeah, Paul, so the way I look at it is that every organization, whether it's family owned, family run, professionally owned, professionally run, every organization has a purpose, because that comes out in its vision statement, in its mission statement, in the oath that the employees take sometime. So every organization has a purpose. But what I have seen in my experience, and that's anecdotal data, not empirical data, is that the purpose of a professional organization changes every time a CEO changes, because each new CEO brings his or her own purpose for the organization. And therefore, consultants are brought in, and, the vision statement changes and the mission statement changes. But the purpose of a family-owned business, whether it's run by the family or by professional, continues. And therefore, it is the purpose that is important for the continuity of the business. And I can just talk about it in a little more detail by citing an example. So I started my career with the Tata Group, which is one of the largest groups in India. Yeah. So the Tata Group was set up with a purpose of where profit was not the main motive, but nation building and giving back to society was an equally important purpose. And the successive generations of the Tatas have carried forward that purpose. Now, some of you may be aware that a few years ago, there was a non-Tata chairman for the group. The chairman of the group was a member of the second largest shareholder of the Tata Group, which is the Palanji Mistry Group. So Cyrus Mistry came in as the chairman of Tata Sons, but he was also the son of he was also a 17% shareholder. And the purpose of his family business was very different from the purpose of the Tatas. And there's enough being written about it in the public domain, so I'm not going to go into it. But the culture started changing, the purpose started changing, and it was then that the Tatas kind of changed the chairman, and now we have a professional chairman for the group. But the professional chairman follows the purpose of the group, and therefore in the last couple of years the group has gone back to doing better than it was. So I cite this example because it is the purpose that actually drives an organization. And in family owned businesses, unless the purpose is carried forward by future generations, there's going to be a disruption in the business.
So you're picking up on what Sian said there in terms of purpose, but it needs to be a shared purpose and it needs to be aligned, and actually everyone needs to be working towards the same end goal. So it's taking it and actually formalizing the structure, which, Christian, comes really nicely to the question I had for you in terms of what sort of governance things, what can family businesses do to make sure that that purpose is embedded and that they've got the right structures in place to drive things forward for hopefully generations to come?
I'm glad you've also asked me about purpose. Because I've got some things which maybe are controversial to say about purpose and a book reference. But let me sort of step it back and let me sort of give you a three-stage model for continuity when I think about continuity. And I'm going to mix up a little bit of sort of academic research from Hong Kong, Singapore, and then also from the West. And so the first element is, three elements. One is for continuity. One is the concept of paying attention to ownership. Yeah. So we have two bits of research in Hong Kong and Singapore about the importance of ownership. And one study looks at, all of the very significant Chinese-owned family businesses, which are 100 years plus. And one of the characteristics of those is there's always been an ownership pruning in the process. Yeah. The second bit of sort of Hong Kong research is some very, very old research. As we're talking about the shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves, debunking that, this paper seems to be aligned with the idea that family firms or Chinese-owned family firms will fail within 3 generations. And the reason they say that is because of something that is culturally unique to the Chinese, which they have something called an equal ownership, equal inheritance rule. Anyway, it gets to the point of the share ownership fragments by 3 generations. So from that, the conclusion is that the ownership role is more important than the management role in a family firm. And it's also critical that you have, an ownership body that is able to make major decisions together and that remains emotionally committed to the business. So ownership is like the first plank of that. Then the second plank is sort of changing gears a little bit and sort of lifting up above that is the importance of the family. So we're all sort of friends and fans of Dennis Jaffe. And if you're not familiar with it, so Dennis Jaffe has written this amazing book called Borrowed from Your Grandchildren, where he's been going around the world studying 100-year significant family businesses. And he's really focused on what gets you from 3 to 5 or 3, 4, 5 and beyond. And his conclusion was that for all of these, I think he studied like 100 plus 100-year-old significant family firms from around the world. He said that in all of them, by the time they got, the first generation creates a great business. That's not to say that other generations are not creating wealth as well. But he said that in the second generation, they all made this decision to be a great family instead of a great business. So I think certainly in my part of the world, like a lot of work needs to be done first around that sort of ownership role, but then secondly, really building out and thinking about what does it mean to have a great family. And one way of thinking about having a great family, and there's also, and maybe Rob can comment after me, there's another FFI research which it sort of debunks the 3 generations myth as well, talking about how the entrepreneurial energy shifts down to the family level. But one way of thinking about what's a great family is to say that your family is flourishing. And so this gets me to my third sort of level of the model, which is to say, to have a flourishing family, you've got to have flourishing individuals. And so that's where I spend a lot of my time, is sort of with the individual family members. And it's like, if you help the individuals to flourish, like then they become more mature participants in the governance, in the ownership, etc., which better able to have that trust and communication. And an element, I've probably saying a lot, an element of individual flourishing gets back to knowing your purpose, right? However, this is where I wanted to do. I was sort of thinking about this. So I'm coming at things from the sort of the individual level, and then that needs to feed into the family and then down to the thing. I'm a bit of a bookworm. You may not be able to see because of my filter. So I'll put the reference in the chat. This is it's a bit of a spiritual book, but it's a good framework, and it's picked up in another book on leadership. It's a book called Life Visioning by a guy called Michael Bernard Beckwith. And he talks about, and I think so as you get into, we need to be intentional about building a great family, and we need to be intentional about helping our individual family members to flourish. You need to get into this stuff in more detail. And this guy says that, you know, there are different stages of people's lived experience and way of living. And I find this is very, very interesting because a lot of people talk about the importance of finding your purpose, right? So on this, he says that there's like 3 or 4 different ways of living or expressing your life. You know, and the first level, the most basic level, is that you think of, you know, you're very much in the sort of the victim mindset. You know, life is a drama. If you've ever heard of it, there's this thing called the drama triangle. And he says, if you're in that victim mindset, drama triangle, there's no point in talking to you about purpose. There's no purpose, right? The next stage of life is, or sort of way of experiencing life is, you know, you're the kind of person who sort of, you know, you create your own goals, you achieve your own goals. You're very much a sense of agency in your life. Like life happens. I can't remember the expression. Like, and in that kind of person, like their idea of purpose is whatever they think their goal around purpose is, and then they work towards it. Right? Then the next stage, it's almost like a stage of consciousness or a stage of adult development, is you start to sort of, the ego starts to reduce a little bit, and you become, you know, you just start to notice that life is happening through you, right? And then you're at the stage where you can like detect what is your individual purpose. Thanks. So yeah, I think we need to become much more expert around this topic of purpose. And yeah, so I think, yeah, okay.
Rob, I think you're nodding and shaking your head a lot there, Rob. I think you probably agree that purpose is central to kind of a lot of the work that goes on in the field of family business, in terms of trying to get it aligned and make a framework that can stand the test of time, but can stand the test of time through the different people that take on the role as the helm of a family business through the generation.
And I love how Christian kind of went to different levels, because there would be owner purpose, family purpose, individual purpose. When we work on owner purpose, we have an assumption. We go in assuming that each generation is going to change, either slightly or greatly, the purpose of owning the business together. And when we talk to owners, you know, in the owner room, we say purpose is a big word. It's hard to put your finger on exactly what we mean. When you're talking to owners, we say, well, you've got a trade-off. You can have goals for your businesses around growing and extending your footprint, making a lot of money, total shareholder return. Your purpose could be liquidity, to take money out of the business. And the third is to control. You have 100% control, all the equity. And if so, you've got decision rights on exactly how the businesses are run, or you can give up control, equity, or debt. But whenever you do, you're constraining your freedom. So it's a really useful starter. And oftentimes what we do with across a generation is that we say, okay, let's talk about the growth, liquidity, control, owner strategy for the current generation and previous generations. Now let's talk about it for the next generation, and how is it going to change? And it's a really useful dynamic to be articulate. Some things pull through, some things they actively need to change. You know, as we're talking here, G1 typically will have a growth control strategy. Very little money will come out until maybe they sell the business, but if they don't, it's about growth and control. You're out to G2, G3, G4. It can be very different. Liquidity could come in. Currently, there's so much discussion we have with clients about, well, why do we control this business? We're very wealthy. That's not the point anymore. How do we give back to society? How to make sure that this is our lever to change the world? And let's make sure that we're doing it. So you can take each level, owner, family, and individual, have a linked in but different approach into purpose is how we think about it. So thanks for putting that forward, Christian.
Rob. Willem, I want to come to you now because obviously you represent one of the oldest family businesses that many of us will have talked about, to be fair. I think you said you were the 14th generation, your nephew has taken over as the 15th generation. So listening to the panelists there talking about purpose and how it's changed over time, would you say that's true for the business that you've come from? How do you think you've stood the test of time to last to the 15th generation stage? What's happened with your purpose over the period of time?
Well, of course, I've often been thinking about how purpose started off, with the first generation, and I think that purpose and values tend to be quite authoritative, and gradually become a kind of a natural, a natural feeling. Which the family has, and also the employees, and also the customers you're dealing with, how they view you. So I think, I think that in terms of values, I think there are three main components there, and that's integrity and respect and customers. And you can break that down again into a more detailed way, is in generosity and communication, quality, excellence, creativity, and entrepreneurship. These are all factors which I think are incredibly important for family firms. And they have a certain advantage over, I think, non-family firms in that sense, because these things are passed on from generation to generation. And of course, if you have publicly quoted companies and so on, that change every time, the CEO with his own ideas and so on will give a different footprint to the company. In family companies, there's much more continuity there, and I would say, they have a collective orientation, a sense of cohesion, and at the same time, they have that long-term perspective in it. So, and I think also the other thing is the sense of stewardship.
I agree with you in terms of both the long-term perspective and also the stewardship. I wanted to go back to the fact that you think over a period of time you've gone from authoritarian to more of a natural feeling, and that's kind of the culture that you've managed to create within the business. How have you what did you do as a family and in previous generations to try and embed that into the way it's become a feeling? It almost sounds like it's just the way we do it. It's our way, it's our purpose, it's the way we do things. But you have to work at that, don't you? Why do you think you were successful in fulfilling that and embedding that into the business?
Well, you do now and again. Of course, when getting together and you're talking about strategy and so on of the company, there are inroads from there where every time the values come in there. How do you go about things to do them? What does competition mean to you? How do you want to tackle competition? All these things come in, and I think it's not that we have a, excuse me. It's not that we have a kind of a book, where leather-bound book where we say, well, these are the values and you take it or leave it. The values, the core values, they are immutable. You can say it's the real core values are immutable. They lead to a common sense of a common vision, say, to the company, and of course the vision may evolve, but I think the values they stay alive, and they don't. The real core values don't change, I think.
It's not the first time we've heard that, Willem, to be fair. A question that's just in terms of what we're on the purpose and just drawing purpose for kind of a bit of a wrap up. A question that's just come in is how do you help align the personal ambitions and the purpose of individuals and family members with the business or the purpose of the overall business? I mean, it's complex, I know, but
it is complex, and it starts, of course. It already starts when you start recruiting, of course, a next generation. And you're not only talking about family then, but employees as well. But especially employing family members, that is something which comes in the, you can say, the requirements of the CV. You know, how you would judge him in certain circumstances. We give cases, for instance, some cases, and ask them, how would you solve that case? And these are typically cases where values come in the story.
So you're talking about value fit in terms of the employees, the recruiting against the values and the culture of the organization to try and make sure there's some sort of fit and purpose.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Christian, sorry, Willem. Christian, you had your hand in the air.
Sorry, had any?
I think so. One of the things we've been talking about so far is you know, perpetuating the business, right? And obviously as we talk about shifting up to the ownership level, you know, then there's that concept of being able to have a portfolio of assets, and especially as you go up to the family level. Again, there's that portfolio thing. How do you reconcile the individual purpose with the collective purpose? So I think the first point I'd make is that it takes a long time for people to figure out what their individual purpose is, and that may, you know, as they mature and grow, etc. And hopefully the family is providing an environment, like a safe container, in which the individuals can figure out what their own individual purpose is. You know, and as we were talking about values, and it might, again, this might be a cultural thing. One of the families that I spend a lot of time with is an Australian family. So it's a Western individualistic kind of culture. And one of their gurus was actually an Indian professor called Monica Sharma, if I can remember that. I don't know if Sonu has heard of her before. But one of the things that she really emphasized, and she comes from the sort of a social change space, is the power that you can unlock, like in a family, you know, and a family enterprise, of allowing the individuals to stand in their own values, like to be really grounded in their own values, as well as having a collective. Right? So you can have both, and it's empowering to have both. Back on the purpose side of things, like, what's really important is to have a flourishing family and emotionally committed, engaged owners. And like, one of the ways that you have emotionally committed, engaged owners is that you've got to give people space to have their own voice, and you've got to have the emotional maturity, tolerance, you know, to have different voices, different opinions without everything breaking up. So there's space for people to have their own individual values, which are different from the collective values. And that could actually, paradoxically, that could be a strength. But then you've got to get to a point where people say, okay, these are the current set of shared values. Are we going to, are we happy to be willing to make a little bit of sacrifice for what we believe is important to participate in this? So that's the idea. That's the sort of the theory about the voluntary social compact. Yeah.
So it goes back to communication and that individual purpose, and then the commonality, the shared business purpose, and bringing in the different roles of kind of leadership, management, ownership all together.
Well, I mean, it's like a polarity. You know, it's not a one thing or the other thing. You can have both. Yeah. Generally, you can look for both. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And to have, and but that sort of trust and communication and good family relationships means you have to have tolerance for different points of view.
Okay. Rob, coming to you, so that's the framework and the purpose is driving everything forward, and that's the way in which the family wants to operate their business. How important is good governance, taking that long-term view and stewardship for the long term? How important is good governance for long-term success?
We think it's essential. Family businesses, you remember the 3-circle model? It's awesome still. It's still super useful. 7 different competing interests. That's so true. The business people may want this. The family outside the business might want this. The owners in the business, the owners out of the business. It's real stuff. And if governance is, how do you make great decisions together? It's an essential thing when there's so much potential conflict of positions and even interests in a system like this. I would say that systems without good governance that's maturing as the family matures will tend to a state, the physicists would call it entropy, and it ends up, unfortunately, in just harmful conflict. So we think a lot, and we've learned a lot from our clients about what is good governance in family business, and it's so different from good governance in publicly traded companies, because you have these families and you have these individual owners that you got to figure out how they're going to make decisions together. So good governance, right people, right information, right decision process, so you can make great decisions together. When we go into a new system that's G2 or beyond, we go in with a mindset that we call the 4-room model of governance. And what it basically means is there would be a management room, a board room, an owner room, and a family room. And they all have different roles, different cultures in the different rooms. So the management room, everyone's familiar with it. There's a CEO who's on top. He or she is the top of a hierarchy. They're making thousands of decisions every day, some important, some not that important. You're trading in competency. I'm the best at logistics, getting things from Hong Kong to the United States ever. And that's why they hire the people in the system are there just for a temporary point of time. When their competency is no longer needed, they're not in the company anymore. Now, a boardroom is very different. They're overseeing the management room. It's typically few people, and we say they either have not much hair or gray hair. There's a lot of wisdom that should be traded. It's a peer-to-peer thing. They're overseeing strategy. They're fire the CEO. They're setting annual dividends. They're making big mergers and acquisitions decisions. They're not getting into the management room. So the whole feel of the room, the boardroom, is quite different. And then the owner room is the 3rd room, and you're only really invited in the owner room if indeed you're an owner. So you don't have the head of logistics coming into the owner room. Typically, if it's a non-family CEO, the CEO is not in the owner room. It's the owners making the biggest, toughest decisions, which are really who can be a shareholder, how are we going to transition shares, what is our owner strategy, and how are we going to work the group dynamic. And then on the side, because it affects all the 3 other rooms, we put the family room. Here, what's really traded is, we hope, positive emotions. People getting together, coming together in an attractive way so they can share experiences, young experiences, older experiences, about what a great asset they own together, what a great family, and they build the family connections, the communication policies, how do we develop the next generation. And the feel of that room should be, frankly, a bit more chaotic, because it's a family and you're doing family things and you're having fun. So many of our families who get together now, it's almost an 80-20 split on what they do when they're together. 80%, we want to be together as a family. And 20%, we'll talk about the business and the ownership stuff, because this is the family room. That is our starter with good governance. What do you have? What don't you have? And with these 4 rooms, we go in and say, well, what are you missing? Some of our systems, you go in and there's no family room. Well, that's interesting. Why not? Or there's a very limited owner room. It's just a perfunctory thing where they're actually going to have to, in the next generation, make big decisions together. So you have to build up either a missing room or what we call just a messy room. A messy room could be an advisory board that's really not leaning into the business the way a good board of directors do. So we think governance going across the development to next generations is essential. And we find this as a useful model that we find family business owners just like, oh, that's so helpful. I'm living in a loft right now. Oh, there are no boundaries among our rooms. I just make business decisions and owner decisions, and I'm head of the family. And they understand if they're going to develop as a system, they'll have to change their governance.
So breaking it down into different frameworks, depending which hat you're wearing at the time, because you're going to be wearing multiple hats, but obviously clearly make it easier.
Right, exactly. We have one client who was really struggling with his father-in-law. They were supposed to be 50-50 owners, but they really hadn't actually done the documentation to say that. And he was very involved in his business. Father-in-law helped start it. And the way he figured out the issue, he listened to his father-in-law. He said, oh, you're actually talking about family issues of respect and development of the next generation. Let's go there and work for a while. We'll come back to the owner issues once we're ready to do that. So they talked as father-in-law, son-in-law, and really got a better place so they could come back into a different room and make some ownership calls.
Wow. So it's powerful stuff. Sean, I want to come to you now. When I mentioned it just now as our stewardship. So do you think that long-standing family firms foster more of a culture of stewardship? And if so, how do they do that? And what are sort of some of the things that we could look for when we look at other businesses and say, actually, we could learn from that? And those are the things that we might want to introduce to our own family firms.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And I think actually it follows on from some of the points that Rob was making. And actually, one of the challenges for family businesses is where you have individuals who have a place in each of the rooms that Rob talked about, and actually helping people remember which room they're in, and helping them to then leave that room and be able to go into another. So one of the challenges I think is particularly difficult is where you have a chairman CEO who's a family member and sitting across both roles, because it's actually quite hard to be in the I'm looking in the 10 to 20 to 30 year window because I'm an owner, as compared with I'm a board member and I need to have a 5-year plan to be able to make my executive team work. So actually that has a direct knock on to this concept of stewardship for a couple of reasons. Good stewardship is exactly what Rob's talked about, where you have an appropriate space to be able to talk about longevity, to be able to talk about where the business is heading, to have a plan of where is it that we want to be so that we will be in good shape for the next generation or the next period of change. And bad stewardship, from my perspective, is let's not talk about it, but we'll keep doing what we've been doing and it's worked so far. So actually, good stewardship allows space for continued entrepreneurship. Actually, businesses need to change. They need to remain relevant both to the markets that they serve, but actually to their shareholders. And so if you're going to be a good steward, you need to keep everybody match fit. You need to know what it is that needs to change, and you need to have an appropriate strategy over a longer term to be able to do that. So one of the very small and simple things that people often don't really think about, in my experience, is, actually if the purpose of the business is to provide for a family of 5, financially, in jobs, whatever it is that it gives you as a family in terms of value that you're looking for, people don't always stop and think about, if I'm stewarding this business to a point where I'm suddenly going to be providing for 15, not 5, what do I need to do differently? Actually, there has to be some evolution and entrepreneurship if you're going to be able to continue to do that. And otherwise you end up in a situation where you force the kind of trimming of the branches because the business gets to the point that it isn't able to sustain in the same way. And that might be right, it might be wrong, but I think the stewardship is not just keep doing it, it's thinking about what it needs to be, planning for it, making space for the 10-year plus strategic thinking. Not just kind of knee-jerk, this is what we do now.
Paul, if I can just add to what Sean just said, And I just want to take this discussion a little at a philosophical level regarding stewardship. So stewardship, when we talk about stewardship, we have a very inward view that we need to be a steward for a family. We need to make sure that our family, prospers and our business continues for generations. The way I also want to expand the word, the role of a steward, is also to look externally towards the employees, because a family business owner is not only responsible for his or her own family and family members, but any family business that employs, say, 50 people, 100 people, 5,000 people also somehow become responsible for the livelihoods of all those families of employees. And therefore, I think as a steward, they have a greater responsibility to ensure that the business prospers. So, whatever issues that they may have in their family should not affect the business, because there are livelihoods at stake. And every time there is a conflict in the family, or and because of that, the business fails or the business shuts down, the family will survive because they have financial assets and other assets, but it is the livelihood of hundreds of thousands other families that get affected. So, when I talk about stewardship, I always do bring in this factor of having a larger view of the family of the owner, and also the family of employees.
It's a good point, Sonu, to be fair. And we've traveled around the world visiting family firms a lot, and actually very often you'll find many generations of the same families that have worked for the same family business, maybe right from day one. So there is a bigger conversation to be had. I guess the question I have for both of you, Christian, I will come to you. The question I have for both of you.
I had a question for Sonu.
Oh, well, go, Christian, go for it.
Can I jump the queue? Sonu, so we've just had, or it's still going, I think, COP26 this week. Does your philosophy of a sort of expanded definition of steward, does it go even wider? Have you thought of?
I wish I could say. I mean, of course it should, but when politics enters, and when we're talking of world leaders, stewardship becomes completely different, and I don't even want to venture into that. I assume you're talking of the political leaders, or are you talking of the corporate leaders?
Of your family business, or the family, the owners that you're working with, and when they're thinking about their stewardship. So you're helping them to expand first one level beyond the family to the employee, etc. Have you ever gone beyond that? Does the topic of sustainability come up a lot with your?
So in India, sustainability is something that is just getting the focus of people, because we are not part of the developed world. There is still a lot of sustainability that is happening because of regulation, but increasingly there are talks about sustainability that are happening in the boardrooms. And again, I have anecdotal data, I don't have empirical data. I haven't been in the owner room. So I don't know whether these conversations around sustainability are happening in the owner rooms, but they've started happening in the boardrooms and also in the management rooms.
Yeah, Christian, from a UK perspective, having just done a 10-day road trip and visited 45 family firms in Scotland, I can categorically say it's on the board and the family agenda. Families want to do the right thing. I think that the challenges we all have at the moment in terms of that stewardship piece and sustainability is there's not a lot of help out there in terms of guidance to help them make the decisions to do the right thing. So a lot of families are trying to do the right thing. They're assimilating the information that's out there and sort of interpreting it in the way that will make the best impact on their staff, the livelihood, the environment, the way in which the bigger planet conversations are happening. But I think there's there's a lot that needs to be done to really give a framework to help businesses in general adopt best practice in terms of helping make bigger decisions that will have a bigger impact on the broader planet, I think. But we're kind of on a journey, and I don't think we're there yet, but COP is ongoing this week. Sorry, Sam.
Sorry, so Paul, if I can just add a little to Christian's question. So sustainability and conversations like these, they are manifested through the charity or the philanthropic work that the families traditionally have been doing. So India as a country has a long history of giving back to society. So when I see the kind of work the families are doing, they really center around their own native places, the villages, helping the villages, do work as small as, say, helping them build check dams so that they have water through the year. Building toilets so that there's proper sanitation, providing training for sustainable livelihood to the women, taking care of the education of the children. So these are manifestations of their their thoughts towards sustainability and helping a larger set of people, larger than just the family and the employees. This is towards community. And I would actually recommend that you read about the work that is being done by large foundations. Tata's come to mind. 66% of ownership of the entire Tata Group is with the Tata Trusts, which use all the profits and all the income that comes back to them back into doing work for the community.
And Sonu, I'd echo that. We all know that family businesses give a lot back and do an awful lot in the environment, especially around the place where they've been and things that relates to it. And that's something that I think, to be fair, probably happens a lot more in a more multi-generational business, because the first couple of years, the first generation, they're really trying to create a business that's sustainable in its own right. And then the sustainability agenda and the giving back agenda is something that comes in a bit later on. So for me, there's a timing in place. I just need to be conscious of time, and obviously anyone else that's listening, if you want to post some questions in the chat box, please do. Willem, a lot is mentioned about succession planning, and obviously to be a long-standing family firm, you have to go through quite a number of successions. How do you make succession, or how as a business have you managed to make succession go through to 15 generations? What are the keys to success? And my other question for you, which is linked to succession, is off camera we were talking, and you said actually when you did the succession process, you then physically stood back and made a conscious decision to step back. Do you think that's one of the preemptors for a good succession plan, is someone that's, once they've handed over and doesn't continue to be involved?
Yes, I think once you have done, have had your assessments with a new generation to take over, I think you've got to give them the responsibility, and also have the confidence, that they can do the job. And of course, they should know that you are somewhere in the background. You are there, where you can raise or you can answer to their questions if they have any. For sure, I think one thing which is important in family companies is that you have to, like, well, we did in the passing on of the baton. In my case, is that we outsourced the assessment. So we gave a basic outline of the job to the assessors, and told them, well, okay, we sent a letter to all the shareholders and the family in general, telling them that I was about to retire in a year or 2 years' time, and that anyone who would feel himself capable of doing the job should put in a CV with a motivational letter to it, and well, if we wouldn't manage there, we'd have little response, or we'd have poor response. We just told them, said, well, we're going outside. Well, luckily that was not the case. We had about five who responded, and these were all young, real next generation, and we had it assessed outside the company, and they came up with a recommendation to the supervisory board, saying, well, who they would feel is the most appropriate successor. And you can, one of the main things is that you avoid having any, inclination of any preferential things towards other family branches or whatever. It's done quite clinically. And I think that is extremely important to maintain. If you can do that that way, it's so often I think that with family companies is that there is some kind of old schoolboys mentality a bit, where one is preferred to the other, and that's purely on emotional terms and so on. So that and that gives great problems.
Having a structure and a framework and actually having some guidance around the whole process, you think would help improve the chances of success?
Yes, yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Rob, do you want to say something?
No, you go ahead if you have any.
Okay. Thanks, Willem. Rob, succession?
I loved how William described it. At least the framing goes in my mind. There are tools, and then there's attitude. And the tools are this blocking and tackling, get some of the independent view in it. For those that are exiting, get a glide path that's over years and has a support system for the people exiting. Necessary and not sufficient are the tools. The attitude is really what I find so interesting in the successful ones versus the ones that are struggling. The framing that hit me, there's this book, a bit of a weird book called Infinite Games, and it defines finite games and infinite games. A finite game is like what you watch on sports, where there's a scoreboard, there are boundaries, there's the rules, the referees, and then someone wins in 90 minutes or loses. Family businesses are so cool because they're infinite games. So the succession process is, I don't even know if process is the right word, because I think it's actually an attitude, or you could call it values. But what we see, let me just talk two stories real quickly. There's this, one of my favorite leaders of a family business. Her name is Regina, works in a family leader in Votorantim, which is a big Brazilian company. She tells this great story when her grandfather took her out to sugarcane fields that they own. And he cracks one open and he says, Regina, taste this, lick it. And she did. It didn't taste like sugar, but it was, and he said, that taste is in our blood. And what he was doing, there's so much of what he did in that little vignette. He said, we're connected to the sugar, we're connected to the field, we're connected to the people who are harvesting it. It's not about a balance sheet, it's something much deeper. She got to be an emotional connection to her firm in a way that lived really for the rest of her life. And she's one of the best family business leaders I've ever met. And she cites this as the starting place for her to connect with it. Another example I have from a different client where there's a matriarch, 92-year-old matriarch, and she still pays her 70-year-old daughters an allowance from the family business. Now, what's being said through taste this versus this allowance? Both, the first game is about connection and meaning and broadening the what's really being passed, what the succession really mean deeply. The second game is about money, control, infantilization. Both games are across generations. Both systems actually have quite successful succession planning. All the tools and rules they set up really well, but the transmission is so different. So I really look deeply at what experiences is the family owners, the family having together. Is it about controlling money? Is it about tasting sugar cane? And so I think the best transitional succession planning actually are these micro experiences that are deep in the family blood.
Yeah,
I love the analogy. I absolutely love the analogy, and I can see Willem smiling and agreeing with you there, Rob. The one thing that I think all the family business owners in the room and listening to this now would be thinking is all of this is really good, but actually time. We only have a limited amount of time. And what advice would you give, Rob, in particular to family business? How important is it to take time out, to take time to actually strategize and focus rather than actually the day-to-day operational stuff and getting that balance right? How important is that?
Time for what, Paul? I want to make sure. Time for
the focusing on the business rather than actually the day-to-day in the business. And you're talking about frameworks and those vignettes and those emotional connections and all those things that all takes time away from necessarily being in the office and the day-to-day decisions that are really important. Get the balance right.
Interesting. I think family businesses change. We have this saying, highest and best use. What's your highest and best use? And with owners, family owners, to think very clearly about what decision rights you want to keep, retain, and everything else you should give away. And what is your highest and best use? That grandfather, he was doing his highest and best use. It wasn't in the boardroom. It wasn't being the CEO. It was touching that next generation's heart in a way. So making time for these micro succession, succession planning or planting the seeds of the future, I actually think that's the highest and best use. And it doesn't take much time, but it takes a whole lot of kind of self-awareness of where your highest and best use is.
Lots of food for thought there. I'm going to come around to each of you now, just to try to wrap up in terms of one final question. But in terms of increasing the chances of success in the long term for a family business, what do you think is the one most overriding factor that every family business owner that wants to plan for the long term should consider seriously and take the steps to introduce as part of their ongoing business or organizational operational setup? Sonu, can I start with you?
Yeah, sure. So for me, the overriding one thing that family business owners need to do is to communicate more and more and more, because in my experience, if people do not speak, little problems then become large problems. And in a way, at least in India, the last year and a half of pandemic has really helped build better communication channels within families. Because in India, as I don't know whether it happened in other parts of the world, but when the lockdown started happening, families kind of converged together. And, parents and children lived in the same house after many, many, many years. And because the first set of lockdown was a really, really serious one, they couldn't even go out of the house. So after a point of time, there wasn't more Netflix that you could watch or more, WhatsApp groups that you could communicate on. So they perforce had to sit down and start speaking. And again, through my discussions with family business owners, it is apparent to me that patriarchs are talking more of finding a successor. Patriarchs are talking more about writing a will, which they believed they were immortal, and therefore every time question of succession came up or writing of a will came up, they said, if it happens to me. So they always looked at it as an if and not a when. But the pandemic has helped a lot of families to declog their communication channels. And, we talked earlier about the purpose of the family and the family business. I think a lot of the purposes also have got clarified or reinforced. And I do think that going forward, at least in my part of the world, I think we're going to have a little less of the conflict problems or problems around, but I thought this was happening, or, my father never listens to me, or look, my son, does his own thing. So communication to me is that one thing that is, it's not given enough importance because it's just seen as something trivial. But if people don't speak, life doesn't move forward.
So no, I'd agree with you. I think I'd add to that actually. I think there's an importance of listening. So communication is great, but if it's only one way, then it can actually cause more potential issues down the line than not. So I think it has to be a two-way, open, honest conversation that's listened to, heard, and addressed. So I completely agree with the communication. Willem, what advice would you give in terms of the one thing that people should go away and take away with them today?
Well, I must say that I fully agreed with Sonu. Is her part in saying is that there's something more than just your bank account. It is also the charitable side which is in there, and that is a very common common goal, which can put both employees and families together. There is a responsibility outside your direct direct environment. There's more to that, and of course there are plenty of things where you can do. In our company, we have a charitable foundation which is a majority shareholder. They have 40% of our shares, so all the dividends go into that well, for 40% into that trust. And we have a board which deals with this foundation and assigns where we are going to be active in providing any charitable activities where we can. So I think that that brings in a very common goal together, and it's a sense which takes you away from pure materialism.
Mm.
Maybe it sounds very idealistic, but I think it has a very useful purposes.
I'd agree, and it's often a way that you can bring in the family members that are not necessarily working in the business, but they can be involved in some of the other activities of the broader family. So it can break down some of those relationships. Yes. So that's a good point. Rob, can I come to you, please?
Yeah, my advice would be two related things: family experiences and owner clarity. Family experiences, looking forward to things, not replaying the grievances of the past, planning emotional connections through micro experiences. And the second is owner clarity, very different set of things you need to do. What do the family owners want for their generation? Growth, control, liquidity, have the hard decisions of why you own it together. Those are the two things.
Thanks, Rob. And Sian?
I was going to say, don't make assumptions, actually. So people make assumptions about who wants what job, whether there's the right level of focus, when people are going to move out of roles, loads and loads of stuff. And actually, if you decision make and make assumptions, it really massively damages trust. And when you get to the point that trust begins to be eroded, actually that then really is a massive problem. So transparency, no assumptions, and high levels of trust, absolutely crucial.
Thanks, Sian. So I think you can safely say from the conversations this afternoon that actually managing a successful business for many generations and through many generations of family, we know it's not easy, but it does come down to some of the basics and getting the basics right and having the frameworks in place, the communication, the open, honest conversation, understanding where you personally want to go and what your drivers are to get to where you want to go, but then how that's aligned to the business. And as someone said early on, actually, do you really want to be in business with your family in the first place? So be open and honest with yourself as well as some of those decision structures. The right governance to make sure the business and the family are being operated. Rob, I love the 4-room idea and the breaking down the different hats and how they come together. Yeah. And the fact it's not just necessarily about the financial and the business, it's about the broader perspective and the employees and embedding the culture and the purpose. So I think we've covered a lot this afternoon. I'd like to thank you all, and apologies, Christian's just dropped off, but I'd like to thank all of our panelists, including Christian, for their time and your thoughts today. It's been a pleasure as always, and I look forward to catching up with all of you again soon. So thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you.
Paul.
It was great.
Take care. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks for all the others. Bye-bye for now.
Bye-bye.